Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Last night, as Andre entered the chat, to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, as Andre says, what a game last night. Gino was so locked in. Yeah, I agree. I agree that Gino was very locked in last night. He made all the throws he had to, but it ultimately ended up being a losing effort against, a Detroit Lions team that looked pretty unstoppable. But kudos to Gino for hanging tough. 56 passes is a lot, man. As Andre said, I'm pretty sure all the props you posted hit too, right? I think that a lot of them did hit, except for the one where I said you should sit Kenneth Walker in fantasy. That was a bad mistake on my part. I did not expect him to have as big a game as he had last night, but he proved me wrong because I was kind of worried going into this game how Seattle was going to look in the run game because of how potent we know the Lions' run defense is, but he really proved me wrong. As Andre said, the D-line couldn't do anything. Yeah, man. It really was one of those games where you kind of had to bank on the offense scoring every drive, and, if it weren't for that DK hit or DK fumble early in the game, I think that, as Andre continues raving about this game, I agree. Amon-Ra's under hit what a call. Witherspoon is so good. To both of those points, Amon-Ra's under hit kind of, one of those predictions where I kind of went against my will because he's on my fantasy team. But it's one of those things where I kind of felt like this offense as Andre also says, 3 touchdowns for K9 sitting on my bench. You got to roll with the punches sometimes in fantasy. But the Witherspoon point, I love Witherspoon too. He's developing still. That's the most impressive thing about him. And, it wasn't entirely the secondary's fault either. It was kind of the fact that the D-line couldn't do anything. The Lions' superior offensive line really imposed their will on that depleted Seahawks D-line, so you have to roll with it. But as long as we can get some players back, it proves that we can have staying power against some of the more tough teams on our schedule. But thank you for all your comments. It was a truly great game, even if, as a Seattle fan, it was a painful one to watch and live with. But to conclude today's show, we want to get into our bold fantasy predictions for Week 5, or Don't Be Surprised If segment, if you will, to conclude today's show. And I have a lot of interesting takes. You are free to comment about them, whether it be criticism or praise for this list. I try to make them as varied as possible, try to make them as wild as possible in terms of the potential of how they can play out. But ultimately, this is a list that you can either, take with a grain of salt or kind of take as gospel if you like. Without further ado, let's jump right into our final segment of the day here. Starting off with a game that has 2 of the better quarterbacks in the league in it, but the way I see it going might not be what you expect. And that is CJ Stroud and Josh Allen disappointing in fantasy. As Andre said, Laporta did something for once too, haha. I actually did not think that, Laporta had that big of an effect on the game. He had some nice timely catches, but I was really impressed, if you want to talk about the Lions offense, Jared Goff. I was just impressed that he was able to pitch a perfect game. He only threw 18 passes, yes, so it wasn't that, he was throwing as many passes as Gino trying to escape pressure, but he kept this offense on rhythm, on schedule, and he perfectly supplemented the run game because that's what they were able to stick with. As you know, they just overwhelmed and imposed their will on Seattle. So talk about, quarterbacking performances that were perfectly representative of what they wanted to see out of him in Detroit from Jared Goff. But speaking of quarterbacks, CJ Stroud and Josh Allen, certainly 2 of the better ones in the league. But I think that this game is going to be disappointing on so many different fronts for both of them. They're coming off 2 kind of weak performances, especially Josh Allen in a game where he commits his first turnover of the year. And CJ Stroud, kind of has been disappointing all year. I mean, he's not putting up the lofty stats that he did last year. It might be indicative of some kind of deeper tension there. As Andre said, yeah, bro, it pains me to say as a Packers fan that the Lions are in the North now. I don't know. I would love to see a Lions-Vikings game, and the Packers, despite all the turnovers that Jordan Love committed, still hung tough with the Vikings. And if a few bounces go their way, you could say they end up winning this game. 2 missed field goals by Narveson, very tough to stomach if you're a Packers fan as well. So who knows? I think that division is certainly going to become more interesting in the stretch as we learn more about Minnesota. I think that for now they're real because they have 2 of the more impressive wins in the league. But the Lions, I still have hope for. They had their best offensive performance of the season. I would like to see it against a better defense. The Packers, with Jordan Love, are still going to have a say. But, it's going to be an interesting divisional race. And it's one that I'm really excited to see play out because I think you can say that 3 teams from that division could easily make the playoffs this year, to a lot of different teams' detriments. But speaking of CJ Stroud and Josh Allen, I feel like in fantasy implications, this game will not have as many offensive fireworks. I look at both of these defenses. They're definitely average at best in terms of how they can effectively stop teams, but they can stay on schedule. They can be opportunistic. They can get takeaways for their team, put their offenses in advantageous situations. And I think this is going to be a game of more, field position than, offensive fireworks. I think it's going to be like one of those gamesmanship games where both coaches are trying to out-scheme the other on both sides of the football. So it's going to be a weird one, but I think at the end of the day, both of these guys are going to have pretty disappointing performances to go off of 2 disappointing performances from this week. Then Baker Mayfield. I continue to sing his praises all week. I'll continue to sing his praises until he puts up a stinker game. Baker Mayfield against Atlanta will have a 300-yard, 3-touchdown performance. Not many this season. Andy Dalton had the first. Who would have thought that this season? But passing is down, But Baker Mayfield's stock is continuing to ascend, though. And against a divisional opponent in what could be a gritty game, as Andre said, the Lions are almost impossible to stop if you can't stop the run. I completely agree, man. I completely agree because David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs are 2 very physical backs. They might be the 2 most physical backs in the entire league because David Montgomery, his style of play is just he's going to smash you in the mouth. And he's not going to like it. As Andre said, he'll shoot 300 for Baker this Thursday. That's my prediction. I love Baker, man. As Andre's saying, is Bijan going to have a good game? I hope so, because what I see out of him this season is that he's getting the touches that Morris promised him, right? But he hasn't been doing much with them. And when Algier comes into the game, he, for some reason, plays better. And the offensive line also blocks better for Algier than they do for Bijan. So I can't really say week by week how Bijan's going to look. I hope and pray that, Bijan has a say in this offense because he is a very skilled player. And I'm not just saying that as someone who watched him at Texas as a big fan of him. I'm saying that as a fan of him in the NFL because I hope that Raheem Morris can utilize him to the best of his abilities because he might just be the most explosive player in that entire offense. But going back to the Baker Mayfield point, I think Baker Mayfield is someone who just can be one of the better quarterbacks in this league right now. It's a league where, quarterbacking play isn't as up as it's been in past years. And it's been tough for QBs to consistently put up big stat lines. But Baker has quietly been putting up big stat lines week in, week out this season. And he's finding his connection with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin easier than last year. Liam Cohen is like the baby Dave Canales in this offensive system. And I just think that the Bucs are going to be a team that, yes, have one of the more difficult stretches in the NFC of any team, but have the offense to hang tough with anyone. And they just beat up the Eagles. Their win over the Commanders is looking impressive. Their win over Detroit is looking more impressive. So who's to say this team can't be a staying power in the NFC this year, especially in an NFC South that could be a weird, wacky division yet again. So Baker, expect him to go off this week against an Atlanta team that I really can't believe in just yet. My next one, the Commanders' defense is going to impress this week. And I actually need to look who they're playing. Sorry, guys, because I completely forgot about it. They are playing someone who I think that they will beat up on. I think that it's the Panthers, but I could be wrong here. But the reason why I think the Commanders' defense will impress is because, not for nothing, Dan Quinn is a defensive-minded coach. And when I see the Commanders' defense and I see some of the players that it has the potential to be a defense that grows into the season and matures into the season. You have a guy in Bobby Wagner who can be an emotional leader for this team. They're actually playing the Browns this week, so it's about the same as the Panthers, at least on the offensive side of the ball. I said it. The Browns are good this year, guys. I don't know what to tell you. But the Commanders' defense, I just feel like I said, they're going to mature as the season goes on. Bobby Wagner's an emotional leader. Frankie Louvu is a very underrated off-ball linebacker. And the secondary has a couple pieces that I like. St. Just, Forbes, even though he's one of the smaller ones in the league, corners in the league, he's going to be someone who I think that is going to really be someone who can set the bar for them. And as much as, this prediction could come back to hit me in the face, because I also think the Commanders have the potential to kind of crumble if, the Cliff Kingsbury kind of sentiment continues. I still think, for at least 1 week, we can appreciate what kind of players the Commanders have on the defensive side of the football. And it's an easy game, too, against Cleveland for them to kind of prove me right. But my last prediction of the day, kind of looking a little bit worse after what happened in that game against Indy. Justin Fields being a surprise top 5 fantasy QB this week. This was more after what we saw of him the 2 weeks ago. But, I'm still sticking by this prediction because Justin Fields has certainly been more impressive than what anyone thought coming into the season through 4 weeks than, the average QB in the league starting for Pittsburgh. And also, not for nothing, he wasn't expected to be anyway, so that makes it even more better for the Steelers. I need to check as well who they're playing because I'm forgetting the schedule. They're playing the Cowboys Sunday night, of course. That's going to be an interesting game because the Cowboys, very banged up team. I think Micah Parsons could be out in this game, could be wrong because the injury certainly looked like it was worse than people expected, but it didn't necessarily look bad enough to hold him out for an entire week. But that defense still has not been impressive. And I feel like Justin Fields can take advantage of this defense both through the air and with his legs. So look for Justin Fields. Maybe not a top 5 fantasy QB this week. I might retract from this prediction a little bit. But potentially a top 10 one. And it's a tall task for him. As Andre said, Cowboys in trouble. Yeah, they're definitely looking very desperate. I think that now is the time of any for Mike McCarthy to try and vary this offense to get it outside of the limitations of Dak and CD and try and open it up. But if he's going to be and continue to be insistent in what he's saying in terms of their offensive philosophy, then I don't see how this team can improve that much. But on the other side of the football, the Steelers can take advantage of this Cowboys team that certainly looks a little bit rough start the year. So that's a fantastic point, Andre. But unfortunately, that will be the end of today's show. Thank you all for watching. As Andre, I'll take this last comment from him off topic, but has JSN taken over as a wide receiver too? He looked great last night. It certainly looked that way. Especially on that 4th down play, where Tyler Lockett, whether you believe it was a penalty or not, was blocking in that situation to get JSN open. So it certainly feels like JSN is taking big steps in this offense. I would love to see him continue to ascend because he's someone who, like I said, if Tyler Lockett leaves, is looking to be someone who could step up. But I was also impressed by a lot of other supplementary pieces as well. For example, Jake Bobo stepping up. A.J. Barner, the rookie tight end, stepping up. A lot of tight end sets that Seattle likes to utilize. Noah Fant as well. Pharaoh Brown stepping up, taking a couple of penalties. Let's go to show that, Seattle has a lot of players on the offense that they can trust. And their depth is impressive. But thank you for all your comments. That will just about do it for today's show. Thank you for all tuning in. Thank you for leaving great comments. Continue making yourselves available to that. Like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network if you so choose. But this has been the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I've been Christopher Shepard. Thank you. We'll be back 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow, same as always, with another great show. But other than that, I am out. Thank you all for tuning in.